Hello, so today I want to give you guys a how to play guide, but this time we're just going to focus on one unit, and that's going to be Twisted Fate. Today we're going to talk about Twisted Fate Reroll and how you can play it to get some nice, easy LP gains if you're not already playing him. This is a very consistent reroll comp, and I think it's one of the best rerolls, if not the best reroll, just for its consistency in set 14. But before we talk about it any further, please make sure to like and subscribe because it does help me out as a small content creator. Sometimes we do some for fun content like tier list, but usually I'm making how to play guides or stuff that's more related to set 14 that will help you to get the most out of your set 14 experience. I'm going to organize everything and put everything into proper playlists starting next week. I'm just in the middle of switching to a new computer that I'm building as parts come in. So next week, even the dog, if you guys missed the dog, it's coming back next week. I just can't set up everything. My computer, like, I'm using like a shitty laptop that has like 30 minutes of battery life. Like, you know, it's tough out here. But anyways, let's talk about Twisted Fate now. Twisted Fate Reroll, to me, is one of the best or most consistent comps that you can play around. Rerolls in general usually revolves around you taking a 2-cost unit or a 1-cost or a 3-cost unit and getting them to 3 stars. And when they're a 3-star unit, they will effectively be as strong as other carries in the game. And the idea is that you're spending your gold early, which allows you to more easily know exactly what you're playing, as well as commit to your comp, get augments that fit the comp, and just generally save HP in your early game. And because of these facets, a lot of times reroll becomes something that is very commonly played if you're just looking for a consistent, you know, top 4, but not necessarily a first, not necessarily a second. There are rerolls that cap higher. So currently right now, like Rengar reroll is something that's really strong and really dominant, and it's one of the best comps you can play in the game. However, Rengar 2-star is really unstable, and this comp requires a lot of gold. So if you're even contested a little bit, or if you have a little bit of difficulty hitting the Rengar 3, you can very easily go 8th. So it's very hard to be like a consistent top 4. And then other rerolls like 1-cost, like revolving around Nitro or Jin, like these type of boards aren't as good as TF in my opinion, because I feel like TF is a little bit easier to play and a little bit more balance in terms of how high it can cap versus the low rolls that you can hit. So now we're actually going to talk about this board. So what do you usually play with Twisted Fate? There's 2 main variations, but we're going to talk about the one that I think is the stronger one, and that is by just playing Vertical Syndicate. So the reason I'm making this video today is because I was going to make a Syndicate guide, and I realized that most of my Syndicate guide would just talk about Twisted Fate and saying, well, I'll make guides on the other stuff later. So this is kind of like a pseudo how to play Syndicate guide. The idea is that whenever you're playing a reroll comp, you want to try and reroll similar cost units because it'll be easy to hit them as 3 stars because you're efficiently rolling. You're rolling at the same level, you're usually at level 6, and that allows you to more easily hit all the other 2 costs, which if you play multiple 2 costs, then thins out the pool, which makes it easier for you to see the units that you want to see, and then you just hit them for free. That's usually why a lot of times when you're playing reroll boards, you want to have boards that make use of the similar cost units. In this case, it works out really well because Darius is also a Syndicate unit. When you play Syndicate, you basically get this little hat that you can put on your unit. The hat allows them to get upgraded to a kingpin, and then there'll be a visual indicator that they have a large purple hat on their board, on their character on your board. With these kingpin bonuses, you can read every single Syndicate unit, and they will say that they have a kingpin bonus and what that kingpin bonus is. Typically, the ones that you put a kingpin bonus on are obviously Twisted Fate in this case, and Darius, because these are units that you're trying to 3-star. When you're playing this comp, a very common version of playing this is basically to play this, fit in 5 Syndicate as soon as you have 5 Syndicate, which usually requires you to find an MF, which sometimes could be a little bit high roll. Up until finding Syndicate, basically you want to just play some extra frontline traits. You have Bruiser, Rapid Fire that you need to for TF, and you also have Vanguard, which is the other frontline trait. So a lot of times what you end up playing is, let me go Divinicorp. Usually end up playing Divinicorp. So I recently made a video on Divinicorp units and how like a Gragas is really powerful because it just gives your whole board a lot of HP, and a Rost is also powerful because it gives your whole board armor. A lot of times you can pick these up very effectively, and then your board is kind of complete with 5 Syndicate, and then you get 2 Bruiser active, so your whole team gains some HP, and then you also get Vanguard active, which helps your Braum to live a little bit longer. The Kayn isn't as important a lot of the time. The Gragas is almost an always must play. Kayn you can swap out for some other units, which I'll talk about after. But basically, you usually go for Darius 3, Twisted Fate 3. You usually want a rapid fire unit, so a lot of times the rapid fire of choice actually ends up being Kog'Maw. The reason Kog'Maw is usually the rapid fire of choice is because it does have a synergy with Boombot, which works out really nicely because you can go for Skarner as well. This board is also really effective with certain augments that promote rerolling. So for example, there's like the twos company or whatever, I forget what it's called, but basically for every 2 costs on your board you get an extra reroll. This board can make use of a lot of 2 costs, which can make it very efficient in rolling for the units and hitting the units. A lot of times if you're not playing 5 Syndicate because you don't have the MF, it makes sense to just play 4 Vanguard a lot of the time, or 4 Bruiser, but 4 Vanguard can fit in pretty nicely because you have the Skarner, the Synergize with the Kog'Maw, and then everything kind of feels really nice on the left side of your board. So a lot of times you'll just play an extra Vanguard and you'll have something that looks like this. But we'll go back to the main cap. I don't think these boards are particularly strong. Skarner is like a nice to have. So sometimes you'll drop the Kayn and you'll just go for Skarner 3, because I think Skarner 3 is a little bit more tanky than Kayn 3 in terms of like being a unit. Kayn gives more team-wide benefit, but if you're going for a 3-star, typically your board will look something like this. And then you'll have the MF. As soon as you find a single copy of her, you put her on your board. Now, let's talk about itemizations. So, Darius, first unit. Well, actually, we'll talk about Twisted Fate. That's the main point of the video anyways. So, main items on Twisted Fate. If you read Twisted Fate, his first line, passive. Gain 2 ability power each attack. What does that mean? What does that mean? You want this guy to auto attack. There is no item that will be better on this unit than something that just scales his auto attack and his attack speed, because when he attacks, he gets stronger. If you make this unit attack a shit ton of times, this unit will gain infinite AP and he'll start one-shotting everybody. So what's the most important item on him? A Guinsoo. This is pretty much what you need to be successful. If you have a Guinsoo, or if you start the game with Guinsoo components and you have a TF, you can probably play towards this reroll line. It's part of the reason why it's so consistent, because this guy scales so well with attack speed. He scales so well with his stacking ability power that a lot of times he will be strong throughout multiple stages of the game. In your stage 2, your stage 3, and even your stage 4, if you eventually 3-star him, he can keep up with a lot of the other carries, because so long as you give him enough time and you make him ramp up enough with the attack speed, he will one-shot, he will do insane damage, he will clutch up, he'll do great things. Additionally, the other item that usually people go for is Gunblade. When you're ramping up the AP and you're doing a bunch of auto attacks, he's basically starting to hit like a truck. Every single time he hits a unit, he's basically going to heal your board. Healing the board helps to sustain the board, which helps you to stack the Guinsoo further. So a lot of times you'll see this pairing of items, Guinsoo with Gunblade, if you played in set 13. Similar idea to Zerion Watchers. Even though you're not playing super deep into a vertical trait, Syndicate gives some extra tankiness, and you're going to have a Syndicate bonus that you can put on one of your frontline units. So often when you do this, I'm just going to talk about the last item here before we talk about like Darius and like playing around Syndicate bonus. Usually people say that it's just Guinsoo again. There's no item, like the items all feel kind of okay. This is the part where you're really flexible, and this is the part that's really nice. If you analyze the board a lot and you look at it, like Guinsoo I think is his best item. Here, like double Guinsoo and Gunblade, but you don't prioritize a double Guinsoo first. I think it's Guinsoo, Gunblade, +1. Guinsoo helps because obviously if you just stack up the attack speed faster, you're going to gain more ability power. Additionally, you could go for damage items. It's just usually not as good as just giving him more attack speed. So a lot of times like a bow item is good because it gives some attack speed and it can work out pretty well. Something like a Giant Slayer is something that I like, or a Guard Breaker. They both give a good chunk of attack speed. Additionally, you might run into a situation where you have just like general AP items that are left over, so like Rabadons or even an Archangels, which feels like kind of like dumb because he's already scaling up his AP really well. The point is that the last item is pretty flexible, and as long as you make an item and preserve HP, you can often play for a top 4. Obviously, your max cap is to play double Guinsoo. One Guinsoo is absolutely essential. Double Guinsoo is not 100% essential, but it is a really good option. So always try to go for it. But if you can't, that's fine. What matters the most is preserving HP. Whenever you're playing a reroll, you want to make sure that you're winning early rounds. If you win the early rounds, you will get your top 4 and get out. That's the point of reroll. Obviously, if you reroll and you high roll everybody and it's all wonderful and good, you can play for a first. But your main job is to make sure that you don't go 5th, to make sure that you go at least 4th and maybe a 3rd, because you convert your position well. And that usually requires you to be really flexible on the last item here. And the thing that's really great is that TF is pretty flexible on his last item. Even in stats, you can see, I don't recommend looking at the stats unless you're like, you know, good at the game or have a good understanding of like item economy and stuff like that. But it's pretty flexible, and a lot of times if you watch people play, they'll put whatever item here just to make sure they preserve HP. Now, let's talk about Syndicate bonus. Syndicate bonus is really important, and it's really good on Twisted Fate. If you read his Kingpin bonus, he basically throws these extra cards. So the extra cards could deal extra damage. Basically, there's the red card, the blue card, and the yellow card. Yellow card is the most RNG that kind of sucks because yellow card just gives you gold. Gold is really good early game, but sometimes in a late game fight, if he just throws on his ult a card and it's a yellow card and it doesn't do any bonus effect, it kind of sucks. Blue and red cards are fine. Red cards like hit like a little bit AoE, and then the blue cards do extra damage as true damage. So blue cards are the ones you want to see the most. It absolutely makes them pump out damage. But red and blue cards are really good, and then yellow card, it helps you hit your board a little bit earlier, but it can sometimes grief your game. So there's a little bit of RNG with this board. So, you know, pay attention to your fights, make sure that you're properly accounting for that. When you play Syndicate, when you play 5 Syndicate, you get 2 crowns, right? Meaning that you get 2 kingpins, like you get 2 hats, sorry. Not only do you get more damage amp and you get more HP, the 2 crowns allows you to put a crown on another unit. So if you're high rolling and you hit Darius and you hit Braum 3, you can play Braum 3 as well. But the idea is that one of these 2 units is going to be a frontline unit that's going to hold all of your tank items. Typically, I'm not going to talk about Braum too much, but if you had Braum 3, you just move items onto the Braum. The Braum's going to be better. So that's just the thing. And Braum you can cap higher with, but typically you're going to be rolling for Darius. If you hit Darius 3, if you read his Kingpin bonus, he basically increases his ability range, and then the damage is reduced from his ability, but then he heals based on every enemy hit. That's like the main part. So with his ability, he kind of does this thing where he spins around in a circle, and then with his Kingpin bonus, he will heal for the enemies that he hits. It's really important for the sustain of Darius to build him kind of like a solo frontline tank. This usually works out pretty well. The idea is that if you solo frontline him, the enemy units will surround him, which will allow him to do more damage via his ability, and will also allow him to heal more, which will help him to sustain really well. Whenever you're solo frontlining a unit, a really good item to put on them is a gargoyle, because similar to his ability, right, for every enemy hit, he will gain HP, or he'll heal HP, which gives him good sustain. Gargoyle gives armor and magic resist based on how many enemies are targeting the holder. So a lot of times if you're playing a board like this, it works out really well. It's a very efficient item if you're solo frontlining a unit, because if there are a lot of units, like for example here, what ends up happening is if you solo frontline them, they all walk up, they surround the Darius, and then the Darius ends up getting a multitude of effects off, or multitude of healing off, and armor and MR from the gargoyles, because he's hitting and getting hit by multiple units, which is extremely powerful. Of course, the last items usually end up being tank / items that can play into his bruiser trait sometimes. Like Sunfire works out really well because if you're solo frontlining him, he's gonna anti-heal most of the frontline, most of the enemy frontline with the Sunfire. But typically your items are pretty flexible. You're trying to make tank items. Giga tank items are really good, right? If you make like, you know, maximum armor and magic resist to complement his bruiser trait, which gives him HP, those also work. You don't even need a gargoyle, but making him as like a pure bulk absolute monster, and then a redemption that gives durability as well as heals him passively, stuff like this is also extremely strong, just a little bit more high roll. But your tank items pretty flexible. You have good opportunities for them. You're just trying to get like raw stats a lot of the times. Armor and MR works really well because he is a bruiser, so you know, less of like those AP focused ones. Like I wouldn't necessarily, like maybe Crown Guard's good on him, but I wouldn't necessarily like jump to make a Crown Guard instantly, if that makes sense. Like stuff like that. You don't want damage items, you want tank items, you want armor and MR. Whatever items you can put on Braum, you can. Braum has really good positioning that he chills based on like the nearest 3 enemies. We talked about them in the positioning guide, but a lot of times with the Braum, you will try and place him on the side of the enemy carry, whichever side the enemy carry is on. If this Braum, like, you know, if you kill some of the frontline units, this Braum might end up chilling the enemy carry, which can sway the fight in your favor. Shaco is kind of useless, so a lot of times if you have an emblem, it's good to just drop the Shaco and you just move on with your life. And then if you end up with a Braum 3-star, you can often play a 4 Vanguard version of this, especially if you have an emblem, because the 4 Vanguard will give you a lot of sustain, or a lot of sustained frontline, which will then allow your TF to kind of pop off and go infinite. Now, the part about this board that makes it really great is the flexible options that you have. So I already showed you, it's a very low cost board. You basically rely on an MF. Until you have the MF, you can just play some extra frontline units or some extra good units in your mid game. That's totally fine. This MF is a really strong way to cap this board late game. So right now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 units or so, which is a little bit awkward, right? Like, you know, when you I don't have 9 units, right? I have 8 units. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, I miscounted. You have 8 units. So obviously you're rolling on level 6, and you have to level in order to get to this 5 syndicate board a little bit later. So in your mid game, a lot of the times you just don't have the MF, and often you could drop the Kog'Maw, because Kog'Maw, you know, it's not super important, but usually in your mid game, you're just not playing Shaco and MF. You're just playing this board on the left-hand side. But something, because if you have double Guinsoo especially, the rapid fire isn't super important. It is still important, but that's what I was trying to say, right? You can drop this and play more frontline if you think that you need more frontline. Now, when you reach your max cap board, a lot of times, TF usually takes like generally like AP-ish items. If you don't have perfect items, you're using a lot of rods and bows here, so a lot of times you're left over with like sword components or glove components, things that don't really work here, that don't really work with tank items. MF is a great use of these extra components, extra AD items. Basically with MF, you can basically put like, you know, Shojin, because you're not playing deep into Dynamo, so it helps you to cast. You can play IE. You can play, like, you know, multiple sword items, other damage amp items. She's really flexible with her items, right? A lot of times you want to put IE and damage amp because she does so much damage. She hits in a wave. She hits a big area. You can also put different, what's it called? Utility items on her as well, like, because she hits so many units on the board. The thing about MF, though, is that she does an insane amount of damage with her Kingpin bonus. She basically fires 4 extra waves, and she can absolutely melt. If you're in a spot where you don't hit Darius 3, for example, let's say you hit Darius 2 and you have Braum 2, if you high roll your TF, you can often play around MF dual carry, and even if you make it to level 9, then you can play like one of the 5 costs. Like Aurora works really well in this board. You can just drop in an extra frontline unit, and she also works as like an AP unit that can hold extra AP items. But when you end up with a board like this, the MF actually works as a secondary carry. So what ends up happening is, I'm just going to use the Exotech item as an example for the like, this is, pretend this is the crown that you use to select the units. You don't necessarily have to select one of the frontline units, right? Especially if they're not going to be a solo frontline tank. If you have other units on your board, Skarner you go for if you're high roll. If not, you can play Kayn. I'm actually going to put Kayn here. I had Skarner on for a while. If people tune in and skip ahead, I'll put Kayn here. You can put Kayn. Your board often will look something like this, and then you can position your TF and your MF to kind of burst down the opponents. You could put the crown on TF and MF. Now, this isn't an always situation. This is something you can always do, but if you feel like you're lacking damage and you think that your front line is stable enough, especially if you have a Syndicate +1, right? If you have a Syndicate +1, your board will look something like this. Let me just find it. Syndicate +1. A lot of times you'll play a board like this. This is what I was saying. If you have an extra Syndicate emblem, you can play into 4 Vanguard, and then you can just level instead. Like, you can play TF, and then you can play into MF and play a board that looks something like this. Leona can be a great replacement. Even earlier on, if you high roll into a Leona when you're re-rolling, you can play Leona over Kayn. Kayn is droppable. Even though he gives armor to everybody, it's not that much armor. Usually the Gragas isn't droppable, but Kayn you can definitely like switch in for a Leona or a better Vanguard, and you'll still be okay. But either way, when you play boards like this, it can be, you might want to have more damage, and then you can play TF 3-star as a 1 carry and Misfortune as the dual carry. And this is the case where you hit TF and you don't hit your necessary front line. This is why this comp works out really well, because there's a lot of room for play. There's a lot of room, like wiggle room, where you can figure out something that you can try and stabilize around. If you lack damage, you still have MF as another option. You can crown both of these two and increase your damage output. If you need more front line, you can put the crown still on one of the front line, either Braum or the Darius. You can go for Braum 3, you can go for Darius 3. If you're stuck on level 8, that's fine, because you can just reroll a little bit further. If you're stuck on level 6, a lot of times you end up being stable around TF and Darius 3. This is why I really like this comp. If I'm looking for a reroll comp to recommend to beginner players or people that are just trying to learn the set or just starting out, this is one that you're probably going to have a lot of success with. It has different variations. You have good opportunity to high roll. You have good opportunity to tempo level and still cap out really high, because you can play around 4 costs and 5 costs and slot them in. There's also pivot options, which you can do, like, you know, you can play around Dynamo MF. Right, this is a similar architecture where if you don't even hit any TFs and you just want to play around this type of board, you can play this board into just 4 Dynamo and just play MF primary carry. But I wouldn't recommend this because usually you have a Guinsoo left over, right? But there's options, is what I'm trying to say. And because of that, it makes it really flexible. which makes it so that like if you play a lot of games of it, you're going to be really comfortable and you're not going to have situations where you absolutely get like deleted by enemy boards, so to speak. But typically your board will look something like this. Then you just play any rapid fire unit. I'm going to put Kog'Maw back in. And you could play around the TF 3-star, MF 2-star. Usually, like I said before, you go for 3-star Darius and then you crown the Darius and the... Oh, you know what? I can use a Syndicate emblem because they're already Syndicate. You can crown TF and you can crown your Darius. But as you can see, I kind of been rambling a little bit, but talking a lot about the comp. There's many different opportunities for you to play around this comp, so I suggest you try it out. I think out of all the reroll comps, this is the good, safe, like, okay, I can just play this. If you high roll it and you can push levels and cap out around different 5 costs, then you have a really good potential for winning out. Things like Garen, Renekton, Aurora, they can all slot into the board really well. Viego also has a shred effect, so he works really well with the board. Zac as well, in some cases, can add the extra front line if you hit him early enough. If you can make it to level 9, hit those 5 costs, you have a good chance of going first. If you can stall out, or if you had an emblem to play more into the stall heavy tactic of TF, stacking up Guinsoo, then you can play a 4 Vanguard variation and have like a good output like that without having to worry about this Shaco. If you hit MF2, MF is pretty good on her damage. She usually needs like a secondary carry with her, but you have the TF anyways that you're going for if you're rerolling. So you have a good opportunity if you high roll MF to also have an extra damage dealer. And then on top of that, you can also move around the crowns to go for full damage, TF and MF, that will help you to deal with like boards that you might not be able to otherwise have enough damage to deal with, that you need more burst heavy damage that's offered with the MF. Or you can still play towards having your crown on your tank, and that will still give you the sustain that you need in order to survive for a lot of the game. Just take these into account. Try and find what works best for you in your particular lobby. But usually, like I said, your board looks something like this. Prioritize Guinsoo Gunblade. Spark notes for the people that skip to the end of the video. Guinsoo Gunblade, last item. Ideally, Guinsoo, if you have to make something else, make sure you save HP. Push levels if you hit TF and you don't hit the other units, or if you hit Darius and you don't hit TF, you can cap out around MF as a dual carry, and you can also cap out around multiple 5 costs. Thanks for watching. Hopefully that was enjoyable, and I'll see you guys around. Sorry about the video being a little bit like kind of rushed and bumbly and without the PowerPoint. Really busy day for me, but things are getting better for me. So next week the videos will be so much better, I promise. Bye.